2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you all to the Civic Exchange, the Abdul Mahid podcast. Tonight, I have my co-host with me, Dr. James Taylor, and I have a special guest with me tonight, the Oakland Police Chief, Chief Lauren Armstrong. Chief Armstrong, welcome to the Civic Exchange.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So, throughout this month, we'll be talking about black in law enforcement. Because the last time we had the show, we based it off from the incident of George Floyd. And Dr. Taylor, we had a statement that we made that black people are on a spiritual journey to be free. And if we're on a spiritual journey to be free, we have to make sure we talk to our black elected officials and our black folks that are in authority, in position of power, that could lead us in the way to give us a guidance how we could fight this battle, because it's all about diversity and inclusion. So tonight I have with me Chief Armstrong. Chief Armstrong, I want to start with telling the people where are you from?
Well, you know, I'm born and raised in Oakland. I'm born and raised in West Oakland, and so I always have to preface that, because in Oakland that means something. Oakland obviously is divided into what we consider two sides. You're either from the east side of Oakland or you're from the west side of Oakland. And both of them have a lot of pride. And I think collectively we all love the city of Oakland, but I think that's meaningful to me because of the history of my community in West Oakland. So born and raised in Oakland, I'm a Climates High graduate. For my Mac family, they know I can't sit before a camera and not acknowledge that the Mac family. McClimate's High is historic and the school of champions. And so as the best high school in the city, I must say I'm proud to have attended McClimate's High School. But it also brought forth a family environment. Growing up in West Oakland, I grew up with a single mother. Never had even a chance to meet my father, but I had a strong mother, a mother that wanted to see something different for me.
You had siblings?
Yes, I had a brother and a sister. My oldest brother was murdered, and that's really what, for me, what was the life-changing experience. It was a sobering reality of violence. You see it every day in certain communities.
How young were you?
At the time I was 13. And when you experience it for yourself, you really begin to understand it, because it's such a finality. It's such an end, right? It's that you're never going to see or experience that person again. And at 13 years old, having an older brother is somebody that you look up to, particularly when you don't have a father. Yeah. They have an important role in your life. And so it was a gap that was in my life. But in that moment, when you grow up in West Oakland, the home of the Black Panthers, when you grow up in a community that advocates for social justice and didn't want you to have a relationship with police, you find yourself in that difficult moment where you have lost somebody that means a lot to you, and you need help. You want that person who was responsible for that crime to be caught. You want them to go to jail. See, where I came from, it's either two things that happen. Either you expected to retaliate, or you hope that the police catch them first. That was the hope. Mm-hmm. And 13 didn't, you weren't excluded from what was expected. I mean, where I grew up, 13, you
of age.
Yeah, you of age to take action. But I found myself at that moment relying on law enforcement to step in, and they did. Mm-hmm. The young man was arrested shortly after the homicide, within a week or two. And I think in that moment, I often say to people, right, it's the moment where that the people who trust law enforcement the least sometimes need them the most. Mm-hmm. And so that trust factor in that moment, I knew then I had to do something in my community to make my community safe. I never thought I'd be in this position. Mm-hmm. I never could have guessed. I wouldn't even told you who the police chief was when I was 13.
Right.
But I'm blessed to have really worked hard to get to this moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, man, listen, man. In this is what they call town business. Mm-hmm. Your success story, man. Mm-hmm. So welcome. That was a great opening. So Chief, you basically answered some of this question already. So at what point, what make you decide to become a police officer?
Well, I think, I've always wanted to live in a safe community. And if you're in Oakland, I envision, I grew up in the 70s, man, where you can go outside and we play football in the middle of the streets till the lights came on, man. We could walk in our neighborhood without the threat of violence. You could go over to your neighbor's house and friend's house and people welcomed you. We was a community, if you would. And then I watched that during the 80s, during the crack generation, sort of deteriorate, right? That we lost a sense of community, we lost a sense of family, and it became about hustling. It became about making money, and those things dominated, the family environment. It just was a different community, and so I just always yearn for that time. Like, hey, kids deserve to grow up like I grew up, without the threat of violence, without hearing shootings and gunshots every day.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting perspective you bring, almost a third eye coming from West Oakland. London Breed is mayor of San Francisco, comes from the Fillmore, has a similar kind of experience and background, where her whole sort of attitude and approach towards governing is informed by her experience in the East Plaza projects over there, right? And yet there's a certain sensitivity she has about the Fillmore, about San Francisco. In other words, she's that history, the migration, and her grandmother, her mom, her brother, her sister. She's had these terrible things in her family. She had a brother we know about who's in state prison. A sister died of a drug overdose. And I don't know, again, other, leaders from other communities, if they, and that's not to say that a white police chief doesn't have an alcoholic brother who has, had other issues, et cetera, and they just don't become publicized. But when I look at someone like you, and I didn't know this about you, and all of the public writing about you, I did not know about your brother. Mm-hmm. And that to me just adds another layer to you now as I sit here. I'm like, well, this man has experienced he's a crime victim. And then you are from West Oakland, and then you rise as, in the ranks from 1999 on to become chief in 20 years. And it's just sort of like, you still have these multiple worldviews that are all present in you now. So you're blue, as the bluest of blue, but then you're the blackest of black. And you have family, and so that to me, I think is really phenomenal, is sort of how you bring a particular local perspective in your position as chief that, an outsider or someone who has not had a West Oakland or East Oakland or North Oakland experience can't sort of bring to the table. So, so for me, it's sort of like, I wonder what insights you think being from here and advantages give you, and do you think they will matter in community, the relationships you already have with, say, the churches and with the pastors and the business of communities across all communities? Do you think they will matter?
I think they matter. I think, Oakland is so unique because we say that it's a big city, but it's a small city, mm-hmm. right? Because there's 6 degrees of separation mm-hmm. between everybody in mm-hmm. our city. Somebody knows somebody, mm-hmm. right? You can't talk to somebody that's actually from Oakland mm-hmm. and don't know somebody that know that person, right? That's just what Oakland is, right? And so I really believe that really helps me do this job because I know that I care. And I often say, as a police officer, I don't know how you can do this job and not care about the community that you police. Mm-hmm. That's so difficult for mm-hmm. me because you're dealing with people that deal with so much trauma mm-hmm. and you're dealing with people that are experiencing some of the worst things they've ever seen in their lives. Right. And when you arrive, they are pouring their emotion onto you. Yeah. And the question is, how can you be in that moment and not be empathetic to the victim of a crime? Right. How can you not be empathetic to a mother who has lost a child? Right. How can you not feel sorry for a child that has been abused? Right. And so for me, it's the care and concern that I have for my community. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned earlier, I think it's the importance of being a victim, mm-hmm. right? That when you understand what it's like to lose somebody in this community, it brings us a different layer of, I think, understanding and connection to what people are experiencing. Mm-hmm. And it really informs me about why I do this job and mm-hmm. why it's so important that I push for initiatives that help make Oakland safer. Mm-hmm. That's why as we have multiple conversations that center around idealistic things like maybe defunding or the abolishment of police, mm-hmm. I'm grounded in public safety. Mm-hmm. I would love to live in a community that didn't need police at all. Mm-hmm. But I also know that this system that we find ourselves a part of, me mm-hmm. as a part of, mm-hmm. was built, on was built on slavery, right? I understand that. I also understand that there has been systemic failure in so many other government systems. Like healthcare has always been bad. My grandmother had the poorest healthcare, and she died of a disease, a heart disease that I see other communities where people suffer from the same thing. They lived to their 90, right? I also know that my grandmother and mother lived in subsidized housing until she died, right? That there was never an option or opportunity for her to actually own her own home, and she died at 80 years old, right? And so I understand all of the systems that have broken down our trust in government, and sometimes the police, right? My uncles went in and out of prison my entire life, and so I know the systemic failures that led to their bad decisions, and so in this moment, I often tell people that I am not one that says that there is not an alternative that we should look towards. But I think when you talk about defunding one system and not dealing with the others that actually produce the outcomes, I think you're not fixing the problem.
One of the things I will keep with me forever, and I don't know if you remember this, but we've been on 3 or 4 panels together with Coach Dixon up at Merritt, who runs a program up there, Margaret Dixon, former OPD officer. But we were also on the panel when Chief Fitzpatrick and when they had the Eberhardt study publicly. And I got a sense then, because I'm not from Oakland, I'm born and raised in Long Island, New York, so I'm used to Nassau County PD, one of the best police departments in the country, highest paid, everything. They're considered one of the best in terms of county. But there's a lot of deep feeling here in Oakland, toward OPD. I mean, at that town hall, you saw that where I'm trying to, just trying to moderate in a generic sense of just keeping the conversation going. But people didn't want to have that conversation. They didn't want to have a regulated conversation. They wanted to just express themselves to the room, which included the chief, the mayor, and the study. And so I got a sense that even having this kind of sit-down conversation with 3 black men from three different perspectives about law enforcement would still not be satisfactory to many in the community. They would be yelling and saying, "What about this? And what about that? And why do y'all do this? And why do y'all do that?" And I'm sure you get that all the time.
Well, to your point, Jim, and
so I'm trying to figure out how can you being from Oakland, like Breed being from San Francisco,
and
help
being in a position of authority.
Help with that.
Yeah, I think we bring the ability to be open to listening to the pain, right? That we don't feel insulted by people's emotion. That we understand where it comes from, because I've seen police abuse. We've seen failures in systems, and so when people express these things to us, it's not a surprise, right? For us, it's like we know where that emotion comes from. We've seen our family members lash out in the same way, and so I think for us, I think it's we find ourselves in these places, in these positions where we can actually effectuate change. I just believe that. I believe the work even that I've done in the police department to reduce racial disparities in who we stop. I mean, really, when people think about what is the initial contact between law enforcement and a community member, particularly African American man, it usually comes in some form, either a traffic stop or a pedestrian stop, right? Either you're getting pulled over or they stopping you on the streets. And I really question how effective that was. And so that wasn't well accepted by the rank and file, limiting their ability to stop who it is that they want to stop. But putting in new policies and new practices and being able to bring down the racial disparity in who we stop by nearly 70% in a 4-year period says to me that we can do things in these positions that actually has a positive impact on community.
And actually, that's a great point. And then this segue now to our next question, because John Burris wrote in his book that a negative encounter with the police is a rite of passage for every black man in America. So so in the black community, within the black family, we all fathers. They have what they call.
But I wonder to what extent that is actually true. But I'll let you finish the question. I would like to debate that question.
So we have what they call the talk. So in a black family, in a black household, so the talk. If you have a son, which I think we all,
and I don't think black people should be given the talk.
The talk. If you have a son, what advice will you give to him about encounter with the police?
I think, again, there are some that believe in having to talk, right? Because they feel like their children are unsafe when they encounter police. I think for those that obviously have had their own experiences with police, that sort of, is why they feel the need to have that talk, because they want their children to get home safe. And in their minds, when they have an interaction with police, they're unsafe, right? And so I say to people, every family is different. Every family has their own beliefs, and you can equip your kid with whatever information you think that will keep them safe. I hope that, my hope in this position is that we can reach a point where you don't have to have the talk anymore. That you can say to people that, hey, as long as you have done the right thing, and as long as you have all the things that you need to identify who you are and answer the officer's questions and interact with this officer in a professional manner, one in which you would expect. When I go to the grocery store, man, I interact with the clerk in a professional manner, right? So the behavior shouldn't change, right? When I go get I buy a pair of shoes, the guy that go get the shoes, I treat him respectfully and professionally. So the question is that what makes it different when you come and when you encounter a police officer? If we just are respectful towards one another, if we're just professional with one another, there shouldn't be a need to change behavior, right? I mean, and so I think that's my reality, right? But I could say every family is different, and people have to do whatever they think they need to do to keep their kids safe. But I think it's about everyday behavior and how we interact with one another. But I also believe
I've been on panels with John Burris multiple times. We've been on panels with John Burris.
I don't want to minimize this point, because this is a very generational topic. So in order for us to get to that point, which I respect that view, but and we have some steps that we have to put in place. We have to have diversity in the police department, and we have to include diversity in the command, and sensitivity training and all the 21st century policing techniques, because we can't just say we don't have the talk again. And James Taylor, to segue to that, I want you to speak to the statistics and numbers,
that's perfect timing.
Because as a black father, you want to make sure your kid go home safely. I understand the chief on that point.
I wanted to share this academic study on policing. I made a copy for both of you that I shared with my students recently in my urban politics class. It's for you to read in your own time. It's a great study. You can read the whole thing in the first paragraph. It summarizes it. It basically says, and this refers to for you and sort of Chief Scott over at San Francisco, that white citizens in a city with black police command, or black mayors in a city like Detroit or say Newark, New Jersey, the white citizens have more of a negative view toward law enforcement in those cities with black chiefs than they do in white settings. So white people in white settings love the police. White people in black settings are more hostile to the police, and that article shows that it's so negative, the white view of black law enforcement leadership is so negative that it actually suppresses and makes the black negative view of policing seem positive. That's how. And so it's called social domination theory, and it almost. I think there's like one police department in America. I think it's Arlington at one point where you had a minority majority police department. You tell me, I don't know exactly all of them, but a minority majority police department that polices and supervises over a white population. Like, in other words, black people all over the country and Latinos and Asians and poor people can map out, you have 66% of all law enforcement is white male. They're 32% of the U.S. population, right? And you think about these sort of interactions, and you begin to realize, having a black police chief, for example, statistically, is one of the best things to discourage police shootings. Statistically, a study that was done of 30, looking at 30 cities. 30 cities, a study was done showed that 23 of the worst police departments in America in terms of shooting were headed by whites, 3 by Latinos, 4 by blacks. Out of the same 30 cities, I have the study right here, out of those same 30 cities, those police departments that had the least shootings, 16 of them were run by black chiefs, the majority. So the worst police departments in terms of law enforcement of fatal shootings have majority white police chiefs. Those that were better in not shooting citizens had majority black chiefs, and it exponentially went down to Latinos and down to whites. So black chiefs matter. Black chiefs matter, and statistically it showed that a black chief, the average the number I saw was 2.8 0 per 100,000 citizens with a black chief, 2.3 with Latinos, 2.8 with whites, right? So it's not like 5 with whites and 2 with blacks. So it's incremental, but a black chief, even as we look at Minnesota, right? We saw what happened with the Kenosha case. We saw what happened with the George Floyd case. That was a black, the fact that black chief of immigrant, if I'm not mistaken, descendant, testified in that George Floyd case was one of the most powerful moments in policing in American history.
Yeah.
Well,
and again, I think there are white chiefs who would have done that.
But that's true. That was.
But the fact that he did that, I was thinking in terms of the politics of the police culture, what kind of bullseyes does he have on his back now, having done this?
Well, that's the whole idea of having a community support. So that's why we celebrate in the chief, because he's from Oakland, and we have the community support, and this is black excellence. So like you said, black chief matters, and he got nothing from support from us. So chief, I want to ask you another question, which is on the line of question that we are talking about now. I'm trying to make you a king, but you're not a king. So I say, if you have the power, what are the things would you like to see change? Number one, within the department. Number two, within the community.
Wow. I mean, I think that's a great question. I think the one thing I continue to want to change in the department is the culture, right? That the policing culture that exists for many years is something that I think we have to continue to do our best to root out old culture. And I do think that this is the moment, right? We're talking about, one of the most diverse communities in the country when we talk about the Bay Area. There are very few people in the Bay Area that hasn't had an interaction with another minority group, that you at some point have went to school with somebody. If you went to college, you went to the gym and had an interaction with somebody. You have been in the company of a minority group. And in most cases, you have a relationship with somebody that's not from your race. And so I do think that there's an opportunity here to really push for diversity and talk about how we can deal with implicit bias and the bias that exists in policing. Policing is an institution that is officers come in with their own bias, and then their biases are fueled by the events that they continue to respond to, right? That if you work in an African-American community and you oftentimes are dealing with African-Americans in negative situations, it can cause cynicism, right? You can believe a certain perspective about the people that you are interacting with, but it doesn't oftentimes reflect the entire race of people. It's just a small group of people that you continue to interact with. But how do law enforcement agencies sort of deal with that? How do we train officers to understand that and understand that that does not represent who that group of people actually are as people? And so we are doing that training. It causes us to actually, I believe, one of the most valuable things I've done is the partnership with Stanford, right? Really bringing in academia, right? To let to push officers to push our organization to be a learning organization, to allow research to actually inform us so we can better understand what drives these things. Because until an academic came in and told us that, hey man, all these negative attitudes that your officers have, all your officers that are walking around having certain opinions about people, that is the cynicism that they are experiencing, and is natural. Because if I put you in a negative environment every day and all you dealt with was negative interactions, it's going to affect your attitude. It's going to affect the way you view people, right? And so we have to offset that, though, with positive interactions.
And what you just said, that was a point. Obama was on 60 Minutes, and he was asked the same question about some of the incident that happened in police department, because and I always tell folks, the police are not the enemy of the black people. So, but what Obama was asked the question, it was like, why do we have incident like this in the community? And his answer was like, he said, oftentimes we put police officers in situations where some of these problems are economics, some of them are social, and we have a psychologist on our last show, and some of them are mental health. And so we have a psychologist, Dr. Outlaw was on our show like a couple of months ago, and he spoke about this. So it's economics, is mental health. And so oftentimes you put officers that are young, and oftentimes they do not belong to the community. and you put them in a situation like
Yeah.
you just
you got a 24-year-old Vietnamese person who has no experience in the
waiting to happen.
You know, you're 24 years old and Vietnamese or white, and you have no experience with black people except through these negative images or television images, which are always off from who we really are as a people.
Yeah.
And then, you know, that, like you say, you know, I don't know if I don't think training can, in many cases, overcome family influences. I actually wrote this right here. This is the strategic bias plan for SFPD. I just did it last week for them. And one of their, you know, I can't think of her name right now. I probably shouldn't think of it anyway. But they came to me and they asked me to look at it, and they wanted to call it minimizing bias. And I went to the Eberhardt study and the other study that's about bias of free policing and said we need to change the language to move beyond minimizing bias to get to bias-free policing. Because I think all anybody black or brown or Latino or poor wants is professional policing.
Right. Yeah.
They don't want the police to be their friends.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have to like the police.
Yeah.
They want law enforcement to be like, I love baseball, and when I see the Yankees, I'm a diehard Yankee fan because of Reggie Jackson. When he came from Oakland over to New York, I fell in love with the Yankees. And when I see Yankees in the uniform, I know I'm in Oakland town. There's something about these tall 6-foot men that just make me say, damn, they're so sharp, you know, and there's something about them that reminds me of law enforcement. When you see law enforcement that's professional, I see the Yankees are just a professional baseball team, and I see law enforcement, I'm just like, that's how you're supposed to be. Just be professional, you know.
Yeah.
And when you see some of the worst, you know, what I was going to say earlier is, you know, every day black people encounter law enforcement. You know, 2,000 calls a day over in San Francisco. How many thousands of calls happen here every day, right? 45 million black people in America, 1.5 million police officers in America. Black people are not being killed in mass. We're not, you know, we have these incidents that are happening and they are too many and they're salient, but they work more like a lynching. Like 5,000 black people out of 4 million black people were lynched. Those 5,000 lynchings were not overwhelming of the 4 million black people who were here, of the 20 million black people who were here at the time. But those 5,000 traumatized everybody. Mm-hmm. So each incident of a George Floyd, of a Sandra Bland traumatizes all 45 million black people. But I want to be clear that at the same time, it traumatizes us. On a daily basis, I would argue that most black people don't have negative experiences with the police. And I ain't no black conservative. I'm telling you, as a black man who lived in Oakland, now, for the last 20 years, I lived in LA, went to college in LA, up in Malibu with a 1988 Cutlass Supreme in Malibu, and also lived in LA, Oakland, and I was born and raised in New York. So I've lived in 3 of the hardest cities in the crack era. That's my generation. So I say that to say, when I look at how much I outrage about what's really going on from Black Lives Matter to Oscar Grant, I realize that's something different than what I'm experiencing as a black man. So every day as a black man, PhD is irrelevant to me because I told you I come from a household. But what's the point? I want to get to the point.
Because you got to make a point.
The point I'm making is simply that when you consider all of these layers of interaction, most black people don't have negative interactions with the police most of the time. Most black people in America have either no encounter or positive encounters. I cannot tell you how many times I've been stopped by OPD, Alameda County, LAPD, New York police, and they let me go when they should not have.
Okay.
I got pulled over on Alameda. I was doing 90 miles per hour one day driving out in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement. I was flying out, going out towards San Lorenzo. Young white CHP pulls me over. I said, oh man, I messed up. I was going too fast. He said, yeah, but because I had that attitude, dude took off 10 miles so I could go to traffic school. I went on Facebook and said, guess what? I just got pulled over by the police as a black man speeding, and he let me go.
But
and I think we need to tell those stories too.
Yeah, but
because those are more common in black life on a daily basis than shootings, and we end up. I'm not telling them I got 3 kids. I'm not telling none of my kids. I'm not telling my kids to fear the police.
Your truth.
And I got 2 teenage boys who walk around here in Oakland, and I don't tell them to fear Oakland.
So your point that you speaking your truth, and that's what it is, and you have to speak your truth.
But I think it look beyond my truth. I think I
want you to know. Hold on. The point is you cannot minimize other people's truth.
No, but
I will not allow you to do that on this podcast.
You asked me to talk about the numbers.
You
asked me to talk about the numbers, and the numbers show overwhelmingly 45 million black people are not encountering the police negatively.
And that's right. And so the point of the matter is that we have situation that has been publicized, and that's why we are having town hall discussion like this, so that we alleviate those fears. We're sitting now with the black chief that speak for the entire department. So the second phase of the question to go is that if you have the power, what are the things will you want to see change in the community, chief?
Well, I think we have to understand the trauma that all of us have experienced over many years. That one incident does, I think, evoke emotions based on many years of what people see and also other people's perspective, right? I think people tell people stories. People tell people that they should hate people. People tell people, I don't know why we are so thrilled to dislike something, right? I mean, I think we, oftentimes I say that it's important to stand up for your rights. It's important to exercise your First Amendment. It's important for your voice to be heard. But what's more important is solutions. Right? It don't matter how many times we come into the streets and protest if we don't ask for something different. What do you want to see different? Right? And what I bring to policing, I believe, is an ear to listen to what it is that you would like to see different. Let's have those conversations, but let that conversation be based on data. Let's make that conversation be on something that's evidence-based. Let's not just talk about one experience when every day our officers are responding to thousands of calls and nothing is happening. What the story that's not told in the city of Oakland is in the last 5 years, over 420 people have been murdered. The vast majority of those people have been African American. And that saddens me, right? That people that look like me, that grew up in the community that I grew up in, are losing their lives. And I've had the unfortunate pleasure of sitting down with mothers of these victims and hearing the stories of how much they miss their children and how much they want the police department to identify who's responsible for that and bring them to justice. And that means that there's going to be two victims, right? There's going to be the initial victim that lost his life and their family, and then there's going to be somebody else that goes to prison for the rest of their lives, and they're not with their family as well. So there's a dual loss, right? There's no wins here. But also on the other side, the part that people don't mention is that there's only been 4 officer-involved shootings during that same 5-year period. So when I'm talking about, I think to Dr. Taylor's, real response is that sometimes, these experiences overshadow what the numbers really suggest, right? The numbers would suggest, if you say 420 people killed in the city in 5 years, and only 4 of which were involved in the officer-involved shooting, that there may be a greater problem that we're ignoring while we're focusing on this issue around police officers. Now, there is a conversation to have about wanting to have a fair, just, and constitutional police department. Everybody, every city deserves it.
And that is the whole idea of why we're having this conversation right now, civic exchange.
Right.
Everybody deserves it. The city of Oakland deserves it. And I'm the first to tell you that this department hasn't always been that way. We haven't always been a fair and just and constitutionally policing department. But that is where we are today. That's where we're moving. That's what reform looks like to me. And I'm going to hold this department accountable. We're going to do it the right way.
And Chief, and I want to thank you for that point. And because with the support of the community and a lot of stakeholders, I think you are on the right path. So I want to just put a combined question. So what is your plan and vision for the entire Oakland Police Department?
Well, my vision and plan is to try to reduce violence in this city. That this is a beautiful city with great people. A lot of wonderful places to experience in the city, from the hills to the lake. I love this city, but oftentimes this city is overshadowed by the crime and violence that occurs in this city. And I think we quickly look to blame somebody. And in most cases, we blame the police department. And so I just say that we can't arrest our way out of the problem, right? But also we can't prevent our way out of the problem either, right? There's a balance that we need to all agree to, that some people that are hell-bent on committing violence probably shouldn't be in our community. Right. But for those that are willing to do things differently, for those that are willing to make different decisions in their lives, we should open up opportunities for them. Really, I grew up with guys, man, I wasn't the smartest guy in the neighborhood. The smartest guy I hung around with sold drugs. So when we talk about the talent that exists in community, it exists in lack of opportunity. So how do we as a community begin to open up opportunities to allow people to make different decisions with their lives? How do we start to tell people to value life itself, right? I got young people that I meet with who are involved in violence that will tell you to your face, I don't care if I live or die. And that's a sad state, right? It's a sad state.
And so those are the layers where you have a lot of the community involvement, community organizations, a lot of service providers, first responders, people that do, violence prevention engage in. But I wonder, in order to have the real kind of transformative, new policing that people keep calling for in different ways, one of the things, again, when you and I were on that panel that you did for me, was when I talked about the importance of reparations in relationship to the war on drugs. Like, we talk about slavery reparations. Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in 2014 brought reparations to Jim Crow, but very few people connect the war on drugs to the reparations debate, all right? And in that panel, I said, because we were listening to a panel of 50 experts, David Muhammad was there from probation, you had Khalil Gibran Muhammad there from Harvard, and we were sitting there talking, and they were throwing all these hundreds of millions of dollars signs around. And I said, why don't we just give the money to the kids? Why don't we give $250,000 to every black child, every poor child, every Latino child born? Because you're going to invest it in them on the other end of punishment anyway. So Jesse said in the 80s, we should invest on this end of young people's development rather than on this end of trying to fix them once they're broken. And so the idea is reparations and connecting reparations to law enforcement. People talking about defund. Again, these are broken ways of, poor language in terms of trying to get at what people are trying to talk about. But when I talked about reparations, Chief Armstrong was the only person, he backed me up. The first person to speak after I spoke out, and the room was silent. Because I said, all this money y'all talking about, let's give it to the kids. Well, and the next thing you know, he said, everything I've done, he said, in terms of growing up in the community, everything in terms of our interactions with law enforcement were always connected back to the economics. Yeah. And so I don't see how you can do any kind of reform on one end. Like, you have to fix the community as well as reforming police.
Well, that's true. And
so how do we get to those brothers that Huey was able to get to, the brother on the block? How do we get to the brother on the block?
Let me answer that question, because what happened, there are a lot of programs that are taking place now. We have we have the 100 Black Men that are doing a lot of outreach program, and I know you have the OK program, which is basically a program that is connected with the Oakland Police Department. Yep. And so it all comes back to community. Yeah. So and then the last question which I want to pose to you, what is your plan for community policing?
Well, I think it's important. I think I want to highlight the relationship. I'm a member of the 100 Black Men. I also am a huge supporter of our Kids program, our OK program. I think it's important that we provide positive role models for young African-American boys and men, right? I think it's so important that they see what you can do, what the possibilities could be. I tell people oftentimes I never actually, I met a professional basketball player when I grew up. I knew a professional baseball player. I knew a professional football player. I never knew a police chief. Right, I never knew a black police chief,
and
right?
that matters.
And it matters, right? It was different, right? Can you be a leader for public safety in your own community? Can you be a role model to somebody that looks like you? I didn't have it, but I hope in this moment that I can be, right? I hope that in this moment, some child that wants to protect his community and wants to see a safe Oakland, just like me, sees me in this position and says, one day I want to be that guy that is the top cop in Oakland. I want to be the one responsible for public safety in the city and in the community that I care about. And I think that's so important that we provide positive role models for young people.
I want to get one more question real quick.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So JT, I want you to ask the chief a question.
If you had do you have a lot of flexibility in projects you can do? Like, you can take away at things and bring things. Do you have like a pet project, like the Scouts program that produced Daniel Outlaw? I mean, she's led Portland, leading Philadelphia, right? In my opinion, should have been leading OPD years ago, but that's a separate conversation.
We came in together.
Right, that's amazing to me. And I wonder, do you have? Because I teach urban politics, and we show in urban politics you can do more at the city level of government. You can experiment with stuff. Like marijuana legalization, gay marriage, in ways that you don't at the federal level first. And so I'm just wondering, like, even the reparations movement is going to be a local movement first, not a national movement from above. And I'm just wondering if there's any sort of pet project or any kind of experimental policing you were thinking about. Because you obviously had to sell your vision to OPD's to be hired to the chief. You've been there for years, and now you're the man in charge. But you had to sell a vision still to people that already knew you. So I'm wondering if you had any sort of pet project or something that you were willing to experiment with locally.
Yeah, I mean, I created this idea called intelligence-led policing that has led to the reduction in stops of African Americans, right? And that was really centered on the idea of being more efficient and effective with our resources. It was a question and a call to all of our officers that did you need to police in a manner that consisted of going out and throwing a wide net and stopping as many people as you could in order to try to find the person who you thought was actually involved in criminal activity. Could you have been more informed, equipped with more information and evidence, and then instead of stopping 20 people, you actually stopped one? And so that was my pet project. How can we reduce the number of African American men in particular that we stop? How can we be more focused in our approach so that we touch the right people and not all people? How can we say that, there is violence in the community, but that community is also, there are good people in that community. How do we make sure the good people are not impacted by law enforcement's actions? And that was my initial first project that has led to a dramatic decrease in overall stops. In 2016, we stopped 22,000 African Americans. Last year, in 2020, we stopped 6,000. And so that was my initial cultural change to the organization of us being able to still drive down crime, but doing it in a more smart, more efficient, and more effective way. And it's actually safer for officers. And so that was the first initiative. The second initiative that I've really been on since I've taken over as chief is the emphasizing of de-escalation, the ability to handle situations using the minimal force needed to get compliance. And that's something that I think is really powerful as we, as law enforcement, recognize that although you have a gun as a tool, it's probably the least used weapon that you have, right? That the vast majority of your incidents are resolved through communication. So how do I make you better at the tool that you use the most, right? And sort of emphasizing techniques that you can use to help de-escalate situations.
Let me ask you a question. You're a pedestrian, you're a citizen in Oakland. What do you want to see the relationship between law enforcement and the black community to look like? What will it look like?
That's a good question, and that's the reason why I've talked to the chief. I've known the chief for years, and I've known for respect for him. We have mutual friends and all that. I think diversity is very important. I think diversity in leadership, diversity in the rank, I think is very important. And I've asked him some of the question about community relationship. So I want to see more interaction. I want to see more outreach.
We have civilian
civic engagement, like like baseball games, sponsored, and outreach, and with the community and just on the beat. And that's why I was asking him, what if his vision about police. Community policing, because that's really a key, because we have our young boys now, they are getting pulled from different perspectives because they're watching stuff on TV, like you say. To your point, we have incidents that are getting blown out of proportion, but those are people's reality, and it affect people. You see what happened with George Floyd. None of us was in Minnesota, but that stuff strike a chord in the entire world. And so I want to give you a parting question, Chief. So what is your goal? Now it's a tall order, and I don't want to put you under the spot, but what are your goals for the community and to make sure our young black boys and black men will see something and want to be it?
Yeah, I think I want to answer your question because I think that centers around your same question around community policing. Our ability to build relationships with people, right? Build relationships with community. I think me being from Oakland it gives me a benefit, right? The benefit of me having relationships. I came into the department with relationships in the city of Oakland because I grew up here with people. That when I interact with people, even as a police officer, as a young cop, they would always say, "Oh, you from Oakland, huh?" just by the way in which I communicate, right? So they knew I was homegrown, right? But how do I begin to push my officers to create and develop relationships with community members so that people in this community can humanize them and not just see them as officers, but also the benefit to the officer is for the officer to humanize the community member and not see them always as a threat.
And that's why I think you play an important role being from the community. People almost on one end whatever negative feelings they have, they also have to be rooting for you.
Yeah.
If you're from West Oakland, you're like, we rooting for this brother. He's from here, like Damian Lillard up in Portland.
Yeah.
He might be up against the Warriors. We love this brother. He might be on that team, but we love him, and he's got to be successful.
Yeah.
So because as a black boy here in Oakland, what that does to a young Ryan Coogler, how that can inspire a young brother like that, or a young sister here in Oakland. So you're inspiring people, and I know there may be people that want to hear more negative or more, critically engaged sort of interrogation of the chief. But to me, it's sort of like I'm more interested in just sort of understanding what your experience has been like. So I'm just glad we've had this opportunity to talk, and sort of what your vision is for the community, and sort of how the homegrown favorite son position you have gives Oakland a responsibility. I mean, the community almost has to, it's what you're talking about, the community-based support. The community almost has to work hard to help you be successful.
Yeah.
The black community has to work hard to help you be successful in terms of Bay Area, and in terms of California cities, and in terms of Bay Area cities, but also in terms of Oakland city politics.
Yeah.
We need for you to be successful, and that means we have to do what we can on the community base, the community engagement parts. And you have so many wonderful people who are doing this work, and they don't get credit for it.
Yeah.
And you know them too. Yeah. Hundreds of people, thousands of people are out there every day right now meeting, trying to make sure people don't meet up on the same corners. They're doing their best.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we don't appreciate that. But I think just like you see over in San Francisco, this groundswell of support for the mayor, there has to be a groundswell of support from the black community here, for multiple reasons, but also because it's important for Black Oakland that this man is successful.
And there's hope, and that's hope, and that's why hope reigns supreme. And I think that's one thing he brings to the
because there are many people who don't want him to be successful.
And that's right, and we don't want to be around those people. We don't want to know those people. We just want to shoot for the right ideas and put the right people in place so that it's true. So, Chief, without further ado, if you have any parting words that you need to say to the people.
I think what you just said is always how I like to sum up my experiences, that every day I come to work with hope.
Yeah.
Right? Hope for a better Oakland, hope for a safer Oakland, and hope for a police department that does its job in a manner in which people can appreciate and respect. And so that's my mission, to bring Oakland into the police department. But I think this city needs to love on one another. Right, that we need to care enough about one another to say that it's not just the police department's job to make it safe, right? That everybody in this community has a responsibility to try to make this city safe, to help save lives, to inspire people to do positive things. I see the greatness in this city, and so obviously people know I have a love and passion for Oakland. This is the only chief's job I've ever applied for. This is the only police department I've ever applied for. And so I'm where I want to be. I'm where I believe God put me here for a reason. And so we'll see.
Well, thank you, man. I want to welcome again to the
so
show.
much.
Ladies and gentlemen,
you.
your partnership with Oakland Police, Chief Armstrong. This is the Civic Exchange. Hope reigns supreme. Until next time, be safe. Don't let your heart be troubled. Thank you.
I love it.
Thank you so much. This is fun.
That's fun, brother. I love it.
Great job.
This is going to be Bible.
Great job. That was fun. Now you have one of your cards here?
Yeah.
Can I get one of his cards? I always joke around. Is that Bobby? Oh, no, I thought you were Bobby for a second.